Okay. You know, Irrational Games, now known as Ghost Story Games, is a bloody remarkable company. If you were to stop and think about all the games it has under its belt, how critically acclaimed most of them were, and not only that, but how popular most of them were with the mainstream audiences, it's kind of crazy. I mean, they produced System Shock 2, a game which, for the longest time, because of how difficult it was to get running on modern systems and because of the mess the state of its ownership was in, it became a legendary good game you will never get to play, in that same category with Grim Fandango and other things of that sort. Legendary games which ultimately just weren't a thing that modern audiences could, in any easy way, get access to. It's a game which remains one of the most unexpectedly influential games of all time. And then you have the BioShock games, well, the first and third ones. Again, two massively popular and influential games. Argue all you like about how good they actually were, the impact of them and their success were staggering. There's just no denying that. With all that success under their belt, all of that critical acclaim, and all of the attention that company has gotten over its lifetime, it's kind of surprising to me that no one ever really talks about the best game they made. No, I'm not talking about BioShock or System Shock or any other shock you care to name. No, I'm not talking about Freedom Force or its expansion where they punch Nazis. No, I'm not talking about Tribes Vengeance. I was going to put a joke here, but I don't actually know what Tribes Vengeance is, and I will consider anyone trying to inform me as to what it is to be performing an unfriendly gesture. No, I'm talking about their best game. Indeed, my favourite game ever. No, today, I'm talking about SWAT 4, and to a vastly lesser extent, its expansion, the Stechkov Syndicate. Released in the mid-2000s, right slap bang in the middle of the time period I personally know best as the 3 years of odd but excellent first-person PC games that saw the release of Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, Pathologic, Half-Life 2, and an assortment of other odd but good titles, SWAT 4 was met with, some fairly solid critical praise. And not much else. So far as I can tell, the game was well liked by the people who played it and sold enough to not kill Irrational there and then, but it didn't exactly take the world by storm, and I entirely understand why. The year before, Half-Life 2 had come out, so it was essentially impossible for anything in the same genre to have any attention paid to it by the media, so consumed was the world in the wiry hairs of Gordon Freeman's goatee. Everyone was knee-deep in the early stages of the massive popularity of console FPS gameplay and stuck right in the middle of the World War II military shooter obsession, which would later become the modern military shooter obsession of the last few years. The genre was starting to move in two opposite directions. One direction led towards heavier, more narrative-driven stuff like Half-Life 2, or indeed BioShock, that would come out 2 years later. The other shifted focus away from both the slow, tactical, almost simulation-ish gameplay of the Rainbow Six series and games like it, and the over-the-top arcade action shooters of the past, and towards more bombastic, set-piece-driven, stop-and-pop gunplay. Thankfully, and in spite of all that, a lot of folks remembered it and kept going on about it years later. Makes sense, it was fucking great. And it is only thanks to those beautiful loons who wouldn't shut up that I've ever even heard of this bloody thing. I first came into contact with SWAT 4 at some point when I was younger. I'm not gonna lie to you and pretend I can remember the exact year, but it was before I'd started making stuff for YouTube, way back when I just got my hands on my first gaming PC. Granted, that gaming PC was, to put it mildly, a steaming piece of shit that couldn't even run Spore without screaming. I'll admit right now that my PC, being a screaming pile of crap at the time, is likely what led me to seek out SWAT 4, or, less specifically, anything that was old enough to probably run acceptably on my glorified toaster. I was led to SWAT 4 specifically due to an ongoing obsession with the Spoony experiment set off by his Let's Play of the thing. I picked up a copy for a relatively low price, especially considering how much the gold version of SWAT 4 goes for these days. I threw that bastard into my DVD drive, arsed around with it for the better part of 3 hours to try to get it to run at a modern resolution, and then had my first experience with it. Let me tell you, SWAT 4 is a confusing thing to go into with no prior experience. The first time I booted up the game, it warned me, nay, it pleaded with me. Please, mister, please play the training mission. This game has a lot of key bindings and functions and abilities you need to know about that we will not tell you about in the game itself, please. I said unto the game, no. It begged again. No, you do not understand. We have some obscure functions that the game will be really hard to play if you don't learn. Come on, it'll only take a few minutes. No, I said again. I need not heed this game's warnings. I'm not an idiot. I can figure it out. I then promptly enter the game and realise two things. First, there are an awful lot of equipment options here that I do not feel confident enough to pick from. And second, I don't know how to change my weapon, tell my squad to do anything other than follow me and punch doors open, or handcuff people. Well played, SWAT 4, I said unto it. Well played. But not well played enough. I don't need to go into your training mission, I'll just go into your key bindings! Oh my, that's really quite a lot of key bindings. Very well. You win. You win this round, smartass. I took to the training course, there to be witted at by one Mr. Flappy-Jaw Bonds, who I swear I did not shoot at just to see if the game would let me kill him. I recall, back in the day, running through it a fair few times in order to try to wrap my head around it, and in spite of that, still needing to semi-regularly check the key bindings in each play session just to make sure I don't accidentally shoot someone up a right treat when I mean to arrest them, or say hello. Shooting Bonds was an accident. I swear. Now, let's stop talking about me and how I dealt with the game and how I didn't shoot Bonds, and if I did, it was an accident, and I didn't do it on purpose, I swear, and let's talk about the game itself. Once you get past the intimidating pile of key bindings and functions the game has, and past the tutorial and not shooting Bonds, and get into the game proper, you're going to be confronted by the mission selection. The game is made up of 13 disconnected levels with literally no connecting thread running from one to the other, but which follow a vague sequence of difficulty, with the glaring and odd exception of the first two levels, which for the life of me seem to be the wrong way round. The first taking place in a Chinese restaurant with a handful of hostages and suspects, and the second taking place in a small family home with at most 4 NPCs in the level, only 2 of whom are armed. The game has zero plot to speak of, it is literally a premise, and then some levels based on that premise, and then it ends. The only thing that runs between each of the levels is who you and your team are. The basic goal of every single level is exactly the same. Enter a building, clear every area of hostiles, arrest or take down those hostiles, arrest all of the hostages, collect all the guns dropped by the hostiles, and report literally everything you do. Every now and again, you'll find yourselves with an extra objective unique to that level, but by and large, those objectives are things you have to do anyway in the normal course of completing the level. Arresting or killing a specific suspect, collecting a specific gun, getting into a specific room, saving a specific hostage, etc., etc. Before entering each level, you'll find yourselves confronted with the pre-mission screen, a series of menus and text boxes, only 2/3 of which are actually of any use. The first bit, and the bit that isn't really worth paying attention to, is a wall of text explaining the situation, oftentimes with an audio clip of Mr. Bonds, who I didn't shoot, explaining the situation himself, occasionally with another audio clip of a 911 call reporting the situation. There are maps of incredibly limited use on offer, pictures of specific suspects or hostages you need to find, which are also of limited use because of the aforementioned having to get all of them anyway. The only part of the first set of menus that is of any use is the choice of entryways. Some level, though not all, offer a choice of multiple spawn points into the level that you can choose from. Personally, I've found that, more often than not, the spawn point the game chooses by default tends to be the optimal one, but it is worth checking. Every now and again, the game throws a curveball at you and spawns you in a stupid place unless you tell it otherwise, or if you're like me and have played the game through roughly 3,000 times, playing it from a different start point can give you a new way to look at the level. Muscle memory trained, clearing, procedures being changed just that little bit because of a new spawn point can really surprisingly shake up your experience with the game. Each of the levels are designed less like traditional gamey areas and more built to make sense as buildings first and video game levels second. This forces you to be semi-constantly dealing with bad angles and inability to cover the entirety of a room with a single movement, allows enemies to hide out of sight of your little door probe thingy by standing behind a corner, and can make it very difficult for you to stop the enemy from running the hell away the moment they hear guns going off. This may sound like a complaint, but frankly I enjoy the game more for the existence of these issues. In SWAT 4 you were playing a handful of slightly dopey police officers, massively outnumbered and outgunned, who are dropped into overtly hostile territory, given a slap on the backside and told to go get 'em, Tiger. I want there to be rooms which are just going to be hell to clear, because no building is created with SWAT team infiltration in mind, and strangely convenient room layouts and prop placement would ruin the experience if you ask me, and you should. I'm a fucking genius. A curious thing it's worth noting about SWAT 4 as well is the nature of its difficulty selection. There are 4 options from easy to elite, but none of them, to my knowledge, seem to actually change anything about the enemy AI behaviour, or the spawn rates of enemies, or their damage output, or anything of that nature. Rather, it seems all the difficulty does is change the amount of points needed to complete any given level. At the end of each level, you are shown to a results screen, which counts up how many points you've earned by arresting suspects peacefully, collecting evidence, probably securing hostages and such, as well as another list of points that you have been deducted due to you being a cockwomble and fucking up. On the lowest difficulty, you basically could just wander through the level with a shotgun, blowing holes in suspects left and right, regardless of if they surrender or not, not picking up weapons and only occasionally remembering to report the hostages you find, and you'll still win the level as long as you didn't kill your teammates or shoot some civilians. On the higher end difficulties, however, you need to be a goddamned maniac in your behaviour. You want guns? Like real guns that shoot bullets? Too bad, mate. You're at elite difficulty now. Pick up your beanbag shotgun and your pepper spray paintball gun and get arresting. Oh, you forgot that one civilian that was dead when you got there? Too bad. Off the force, dickhead. Personally, I think that playing non-lethal on the higher difficulties is the best way to play the game. It essentially forces you to think carefully and cautiously. It does cut down on your options for actual weaponry, because quite frankly, if one of the suspects dies, or one of your own guys dies, you basically have to start the level again. But that tension, that need to be absolutely perfect and precise in your movements and your speedy clearing and securing of any given room, really leans into the fantasy of being this elite team of SWAT officers. Though sometimes it is fun to just knock the difficulty back down to easy and go horse crazy as some assholes who decided to shoot up a nightclub. I'll grant you that parts of the game sound repetitive, and hey, maybe for some people it would be, and maybe that's why the game wasn't exactly a world beater when it was released. But I've never had that issue personally. In my experience with the game, the sheer amount of options you are provided for, with different weapon and kit choices, along with the moderate randomization of NPC placement in each level, manages to stop the game from ever really becoming dull. As for the expansion, the Dschinghis Syndicate, I can't speak too much as to its quality. For reasons I don't understand myself, I've never really gotten around to playing it. It adds a few more weapon and item selections in the equipment screen, both lethal and non-lethal, adds 7 new levels with a vague connecting plot involving taking down the titular Dschinghis Syndicate. I can't imagine it's much of a departure from the base game. It seemed to be fairly good from what little I did play of it. If you're interested in picking the game up, and I do wholeheartedly recommend it, it's now easier to get your hands on than ever. Back when I decided to pick it up, I needed to buy a physical copy, but not too long ago, GOG started selling the gold version of the game, the version which comes with the Dschinghis Syndicate expansion, and has been made certain to run on modern systems for a fairly low price. And indeed, even the physical copies, which go for just over 20 quid when last I checked, are pretty easy to get running on modern systems. All in all, it's an interesting, methodical, strategic squad-based FPS that, so far as I can tell, is almost entirely unique. I bloody love it. It's my favourite game ever.
Has the best chance of stopping him cold.